Welcome back to the World Networking Podcast. Today we have an interview with an individual with years of experience in different various trades. So should be a fun one. We have a long discussion here, so I'm gonna drop us right into this, and I really do hope you stay along for the ride. Enjoy. Welcome to the World Networking Podcast. Today we have Jeff Socek on with us. He has some experience with some landfill management. How would you like to introduce yourself?
Good day, Cameron. Grew up in the Chicago area in the suburbs, and houses were packed tight together. So my grandmother had a very large yard, one of the few very large yards, and we would help her prepare her garden every year in the spring. That's where I got my start in the gardening. It was just helping out with her and her yard, and her taking me and my brother around, and we earned $1 if we would turn her soil over for the planting of the year. And let's see, from there I graduated high school in '79, entered the Air Force because I had no real plan of what I wanted to do with my life at that point. And I went in as an open mechanic thinking I was going to be a diesel mechanic. But they gave me the heavy equipment operator trade as part of the program. I went through that, learned how to run some pretty good size equipment, snow removal, road maintenance, building, runway maintenance, in sweeping in the summer and snow removal in the winter. And then I went back to Chicago, but I didn't like it. I had been in South Dakota. It was wide open and there was mountains. And I went back to the big city, and I did not like it. So I got a chance to get out, and I moved to California in 1989. Took my truck driving and heavy equipment skills with me, and I ended up in Napa, California. And I thought I was going to go work at the Port of Oakland, but that job did not present itself by the time I had gotten out here. And so I became a roofer. I met my uncle in Fair Oaks, California, and moved there shortly after. And that's kind of where my real gardening skills developed. As a trucker at the time in the Sacramento area, I didn't have a lot of spare time, but I really wanted to grow things and to make my surroundings look better. I lived in an apartment at the time, so I had a back patio that I could plant containers. So my first real garden was a container garden. And I did that for a while until I bought my house. And my house had a huge backyard. So half the backyard, I created a giant garden. And I started gardening while I was trucking and trying to find as many shortcuts as I could to get as much done as I could in the growing season. And I had quite a bit of success.
So you really like that adventurous feel of kind of the West, getting out there and seeing the land and how much room for growth there was? That kind of excited you?
Yeah, growing up in the city, being in the city was normal. And then in the Air Force, I was in South Dakota, and it was wide open. I played in the Black Hills, and I went over into Wyoming and Montana, and it was all wide open still. And then I went back, and I felt cramped.
Yeah. No.
Once you're in wide open space like that, it's cramped once you get back to the city. So
absolutely. Yeah, that's how it felt in San Francisco when I moved back from the mountains after winter. There was just so much going on. It's almost an overstimulation when you're around it and you come back. It's different each time you come back to it, because there's pros and cons to everything. There's obviously a pro with the difference of culture and diversity, but when it gets down to it, having space, having time to have that silence is also a very important aspect that I definitely value. But Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience about your experiences in the trades? Is there any aspect that was your favorite during the trades?
I enjoyed the big equipment. I was when I left Chicago, I was working for the railroad lifting sea containers with a giant crane, and just that was very satisfying for me, just to operate something that big and to do, you know, that kind of a task, where I knew that the average person probably would have a hard time climbing 130 feet up into the cab, much less operating the machine.
Yeah, not for me. That's a little too high.
So that would be one aspect of the equipment operation. I really enjoy the big equipment, the cranes and stuff like that. That was it wasn't work for me. It was fun.
Yeah, that's a very intense job. A lot of people couldn't handle that kind of pressure, but the fact that you handled it so naturally shows a great character development over the years. I'm sure being comfortable around the heavier equipment.
Right, and the part that you can't see all the way on the other side, you have to imagine where that machine is in relation to the train. There were trailers parked alongside the train, either being loaded onto the train or unloaded from the train to be going out to the customer. So it was really I worked nights, and there was, you know, just the work crew, and we didn't have the large volume of truckers that come in the daytime. We had a few during the night, but it was kind of peaceful being alone up in the cab. You have a ground man; he's giving you hand signals, and around this big monster crane.
Oh yeah. Yeah, all about observation there. That's in the way people haul things on the day-to-day. Like the average person, when they're handling something that's a little oversized, is there anything you would recommend that people generally do, like safety measures to take into consideration when they haul that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you know, and the occasional heavy load hauler will tend to under-secure their load, to put extra straps on a load forward heavy on trailers, about 10% heavier on the front than the back. Otherwise, if you're a little tail heavy, your load could sway on you. Your trailer could sway, and that's an unsafe condition while you're driving.
I think a lot of people forget that one. Balancing the scale of weight. It kind of can go over your head when you're trying to pack as much as you can into such a tight corridor.
Yes. So those are, you know, things to watch out for. As I haul flatbed loads, I would have straps that would hold 10,000 pounds each, and I'd put, you know, a dozen of them on an 80,000 pound load. So I was overstrapped by 4 or 5 straps usually. And it's just, you know, just be extra careful is about it. Watch your height. 14 feet is the maximum for the Department of Transportation. And there are many bridges that are less than that. So
know your route. That's what I
know your route. Read the signs in front of the bridges. They usually tell you how tall that obstruction is. And if it's, you know, and get a tape measure and measure your load. I would have to do that constantly, hauling heavy equipment. I'd have to climb up on top of the equipment and make sure that the backhoe boom or the excavator boom was below 14 feet.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
So that's another thing to be aware of. And gas stations, there are quite a few gas stations that don't have an awning that's 14 feet up. You can find videos on YouTube all over the place of people pulling into gas stations with their RV trailer and taking out the whole awning that's over all the pumps. So
Oh my God.
Not a good place to be if you're the guy.
That's something I haven't really thought about. That's that's a mess. Especially if it's somewhere a little bit more desolate. There's not a lot of gas station stops.
Right.
Could be very
the smaller gas stations. The larger name chain gas stations will probably have the 14-foot height over the pumps. Yeah. But there's a lot of small gas stations that won't.
Yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Definitely, if you're hauling anything tall. But I think we've kind of gathered through what you've said that trucking's something you really enjoyed. But overall, was the trucking industry something you enjoyed? Was there a harder aspect people don't see to it? Would you typically say that the majority of truck drivers are treated fairly?
The trucking industry, let me put it this way: everything that goes to a store, everything that comes out of a field, that comes in, any raw materials that go into a manufacturing plant or finished products that come out of it, anything goes in and out of a warehouse happens in a truck. So they're essential for our way of life as we're living it now. One of the hardest things about trucking is nobody wants to be behind a truck because they're big, they obscure your view, they're slow. Nobody understands that it takes a lot of space and a long time for a truck to slow down and even stop. So, there's a lot of cars that will pull in front of a truck and then stop to turn into a fast food joint or something. And so the truck's got to shut it down, and then all of a sudden the car's sitting there waiting for somebody to walk across the street. So, most people don't think about what it takes to run that truck behind them. They're just thinking about their car and where they're going in the fast food place.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a hard time reflecting for a lot of people on where things are sourced from. And I think that's something people are waking up to, especially with more concern on like heart disease and diabetes. This is a very real phenomenon when you don't take care of your body's natural processes.
Right, and so you're looking more toward the pharmaceutical industry, which is ships its products by truck and train and ship.
Yeah, it all connects. Yeah, that's it's not disconnected in that sense, in the slightest.
So, and the other thing, what people should be aware of that may be driving around trucks is don't sit next to them. If you're gonna pass them and keep going. Don't pull up next to them and just sit next to them. If something happens, if they lose a tire on their steering axle, they are not going to be able to keep that truck going straight. That truck is going to go in the direction of the flat tire almost instantaneously. It sounds like a bomb going off when it does happen. And the trucker can do just about all he can is to keep it out of the ditch. So if you're next to a truck and he blows a tire, it's going to be bad news for you.
Is that anything you experienced through one of your coworkers or even personally?
No, I've blown a spare tire, and I was fortunately next to an exit ramp that I had just passed the exit ramp, and the tire blew, and it dragged me across the little divider triangle area up the exit ramp. It was my right spare tire, and I swear I swallowed a car. Ran over a car, the way it sounded, the way it felt. And by the time I got it stopped, it took me maybe 100 yards, maybe 50 yards to get it stopped as it was dragging me to the right. So there was nothing I could do to keep it between the lines once that tire went.
Yeah, it was moving you at that point, especially with that much mass. Like, there's no such thing as quick maneuvers.
Not with a truck, no.
No.
So that's the other thing, if you're passing a truck on the highway, just keep passing, just keep going. Yeah. They don't like when you sit next to them.
Yeah, I definitely don't like passing trucks on the freeway for that reason. You never know. You really never know.
And especially on the blind side, they can't really see a whole lot on that side. If you can't see them in the mirror, they can't see you.
Yeah, and this is very serious stuff.
It's deadly stuff.
Life saving potentially if you just keep these things in mind and keep a healthy respect. But
those are my life-saving tips for the day.
they're very good. They're very well worded. But with that taken into consideration, what are your thoughts on the distribution as a whole when taking the U.S. economy into consideration of that? Would you potentially suggest like what could possibly help the effectiveness of this industry?
Distribution is pretty good as a whole. The shipping industry, now that they're standardized with the containerization of everything, every country has the same containers, the same cranes, the same trailers that haul the containers around. So no matter where you send something or get something, it'll fit on your truck. You don't have to unload a truck to reload another truck. So in that regard, it's standardized and it's very efficient. The things that I've seen lately have to do with, it all started with the Rona. There's everybody being locked inside. There was a lot more online ordering, but a lot less in-person ordering at stores because they locked people out. So it kind of rearranged the shipping from the small supplier to the big suppliers like Amazon. And trucks were still moving, but the supply chains changed. The big guys have their producers. The little guys have different producers in smaller quantities, but it's spread out over a wider area around the world. So China has not quite opened up yet to the shipping. So the supplies of things that are already here in America are dwindling. Outside China right now, there are tens of thousands of container ships just parked because they haven't reopened their manufacturing sectors yet. So there's going to be a quantum shift coming up in what you can get. And of course, because it's going to be more scarce, you'll have to pay more for it.
Yeah, so we're seeing more natural inflation just due to like geopolitics.
Yes, geopolitics are part of it. They're not producing things. They're not sitting on a glut of extra stuff over in China because they haven't really opened their manufacturing industry. So it's going to take some time once they do for them to produce enough products to start shipping again. So there's going to be a lag time when all this stuff happens that, well, there's other issues with the dollar and petrodollar and stuff like that, but we don't have to go into that now. But it's, like you said, geopolitical. There's a lot of factors that are working, and China is choosing not to ship things. So
that's made the delays worse.
It's made the delays worse, made things scarce, and it's made things more expensive.
Totally. No, it checks out. I mean, I think everyone's noticed that there's a lot more holes in the shelves, so to speak. So taking these things into consideration, it teaches you to not be so surprised if you see more of that until this is more resolved and at a stable situation. Because
well, I think we're going to have to start more manufacturing in America just to be more secure in the long run.
Oh, and it makes the most sense transportation-wise and economically for our people here in the States. because there's a problem with good manufacturers.
Well, yes. Everybody knows that most of the things that come from China are just cheap and crappy, but they order them anyway.
Yeah.
The American standard for products has been higher, and because Americans take pride in what they produce, the Chinese producers are kind of they're almost forced to produce stuff, so they don't have the pride in their craftsmanship that they could have. You know, I know plenty of Chinese craftsmen that do really nice work, but the average factory worker is, you know, working long hours and very the government's just breathing down their neck. So, you know, they just get things out. They don't put the quality into them. Yeah. And that's why their stuff falls apart.
Yeah, there's a strict ordinance that these people have to follow under.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah, with that many people too, we think it's competitive here. I'm sure it's got to be even more competitive there when it boils down to reputation and being a good worker. I'm sure that.
Yeah, they're just looking for somebody that can do the job. They're not looking for somebody that can do the job well.
Yeah, that's a fair evaluation of the situation, I'd say. As an American citizen, I can only say so much because we're just not there. We don't. Our cultures are so diverse, but there's something to be said though about the pressure, because you're absolutely right. There's tons of cases of China's beautiful craftsmanship shining through. I mean, there's no doubt about that. They've been around for. I mean, they're the oldest country in the world still, I believe.
Oldest civilization, yeah. I guess you can go back and forth between that and the Egyptians.
Yeah, but the Egyptians have, both culturally have shifted a lot from their ancient predecessors. So,
right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You could argue the two kind of have a similar situation there.
Yeah, I read a book called 1421. Talks about China discovering America 80, 90 years before Christopher Columbus. It'd be a good book if you'd like to read that. It talks about Chinese culture, and then just after the ships went out, there were 4 armadas that went out, hundreds of ships in 4 different directions. And after they left, they had a regime change in the leaders of China, and they started. They went through a dark area where they eliminated all the progress China had made up to that point.
Yeah, they destroyed their armada.
Started destroying their own history.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for a while there, China had a phase where China believed they had everything China needed. So they closed trade off in the New World. They didn't want anything to do with it. Which is crazy because they had the naval power, absolutely, to make a colonial gesture, but time had it to go this certain way, and things happened and people expanded.
Well, the book goes through several things. It's written by a man named Gavin Menzies, Menzies, and he was a submariner in the British Navy, and so he knows ocean currents and stuff like that. So he used that information of, he's traveled the world on ships and submarines, and he's really done a good job of putting it together. It's a great book, and I learned a lot of things. I learned that in the Sacramento River, there's a possible Chinese sailing vessel with rice on it.
Wow.
sunk from before Christopher Columbus ever sailed. You know,
Wow.
it was probably 1422 or 23 when it sunk.
Now that's something I haven't heard of personally. That's
I think you would like the book. It's 1421 by Gavin Menzies, and you can get it on just about any bookseller.
I'll check that out. Definitely. I enjoy that kind of history, especially with different cultures outside of our own.
And it explains a lot of the indigenous people and the Chinese interbred. Wherever the Chinese went, they tried to form colonies, and they left people there to create a colony with the indigenous population. They took fruits and plants back with them and animals, and they left animals. There's evidence of Chinese chickens down in South America.
Huh. Really?
And also Chinese DNA in some of the indigenous populations.
Now that I do believe that, like with how many people come from that region, you would expect there to be more naval exploration. Kind of how Russia poked their heads earlier, or I should say the Norse. But there were Russian fur traders in the early period, so.
And they were in America and in Alaska and Canada.
Yeah. That's definitely something that happened for a long time until the West was more carved out.
Right.
But with that said, what's the most successful thing that you've had a chance to repair or repurpose? And what are the potential problems with working with others on scrapping projects? Have you had any issues collaborating on these kinds of things and tinkerings?
We'll start with the repair or repurpose. When I was a teenager, I couldn't afford a mechanic, so I started taking my cars apart when they broke and seeing if I could make them run. So I think probably the first real large repair job I did was I put a new body on a Volkswagen Bug. My old body was rusty, but my floor pan was good. So I took a 3-day weekend, and I drove my car in, and I took the body off of it, and I had the other body waiting for me, which I had to remove from its floor pan, and then I did a body swap, and that was in 1983.
Wow. That was a
so
good
that would be my
walk,
first big success. I was buying cars out of junkyards. I bought a 59 double-door Volkswagen panel van out of a junkyard in South Dakota. Didn't have any engine or trans in it. And I had a 64 Volkswagen bus that was crashed. I did not crash it, but I know who did. It's a long time ago, so I try to forget. But I put the drivetrain from that into the bus that I picked up out of the junkyard, and I drove it for 4 years after that, back and forth to South Dakota to Chicago and all over the place.
Well, that must have been fun, being able to drive something that you helped rebuild.
Yeah, I didn't think about it as fun, other than I saved a bunch of money by paying a mechanic to do it. You know, I learned in the process of how it was put together, you know, that kind of thing. And I also learned what my skills were.
That's true.
You know,
because if
it was a good booster in, you know, knowing I could work with my hands and get things done. And I didn't need to rely on somebody else and pay them to do it.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't know the professionals, then you have to kind of take the mantle.
Yeah, and if they're not your friend, you pay a premium for what they learned how to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I don't begrudge any of them charging, because it costs a lot of money to go through the education it takes to be that person. So
yeah, especially with modern EV cars, the repairs are constantly changing. Being a mechanic nowadays, I would say, is slowly becoming one of the tougher trades jobs.
Yeah, if you don't know anything about computers, then you're not going to be an auto mechanic nowadays.
Yeah, no, there's so much integration there. But
I prefer not buying anything that needs to be smogged. So everything I buy is 1975 or older.
Yeah, that's completely fair. There's a lot of hoops with some of the older stuff.
Yeah, most of it goes to the junkyard because it's not really collectible. I mean,
yeah. But
and it costs a fortune to get it back on the road after you do the smog stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is there any experiences that you had with other people that kind of brought you to putting more onto your self-studies or your self-skills? Because I know with a lot of those things that it's dangerous to have people who don't necessarily understand the process of what's going on, what's happening. There's potential hazards that the everyday person doesn't really think about the same way a mechanic might say.
Right. Yeah. Balancing a vehicle, taking both tires off and balancing on a floor jack on its pumpkin could be a little dangerous. You know, there was a lot of things that I learned along the way. I didn't smash too many fingers or cut myself too much, but I did. You know, there was the occasional injury, which made me that much more aware of how I should proceed with my future work, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I did take individual courses when I needed to learn something. When I was 17, I got a job working at a manufacturing plant that made hydraulic cylinders. I started out in the stock room, and I worked my way through the machine shop, and I eventually I took a basic welding course at the local college, junior college. And after that, I became their brazier, and I would braze brass pistons onto chrome-plated and stainless steel rods that would become the piston and rod assembly inside the hydraulic cylinder. And I was the only one in the shop that could do it.
So there was like
they would have a
shortage of that kind of skill.
Go ahead.
Oh, there was like a shortage of that kind of skill in that labor pool.
In my area, there was, yeah. And there was, they would hire a guy to come in a couple of days a week to just do whatever they needed done. And he was like a part-time professional welder. And that was just one of his extra gigs. And then I never saw him again after I went through my welding course. So he kind of lost out on that. They were paying him $20 an hour. They were paying me $4.25.
Oh, wow. So that was kind of something you got a little gypped on.
Well, no, because you know I was that's what the wage was back then for the average worker. You know, it was just above minimum wage, and I was enjoying the exposure to using gas to braze with. You know, it was new for me, so it was kind of a fun little experience.
Yeah,
that I got paid for.
That's something that you definitely don't hear everyone doing as well. Brazing's a specialty for sure. There's
right, and you're still melting metal, but it's a bronze instead of steel.
Yeah, different alloys that maybe the typical welder doesn't necessarily deal with on the day-to-day. Yeah,
and there were things that I learned, like if you put heat on the opposite side, you could the braze would travel toward the heat through the joint. So it was just fun, you know. is like soldering on a with a higher heat level.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for those who don't know, we actually did some fabrication classes together, Jeff and I, and we've had a couple months of experience together doing different weldings or welds and projects. So I know Jeff's very skilled with his welds, and he's very knowledgeable in the different facets that there are with the art. There's a lot of elements that aren't as hard as you would think with welding, but it's a detailed orientation. Like, you have to make sure that you pay attention and are perceptive enough to know your temperatures, know your rhythms. But that's something I think Jeff has a good hold on. So hearing this about the brazing is really neat stuff, Jeff. And I appreciate you sharing that kind of story.
Yeah, that's I was still a kid, but here I am, a brazier at a manufacturing plant. So the one thing I learned about welding in general, brazing, welding, is cleanliness. If what you're welding, the spot you're welding is clean, your chances of a successful weld would go way up.
Yeah, that's definitely important. Having
cleaning any oils off, cleaning any rust off, and if you're brazing or soldering, you'll need a flux. If there's no flux, then the braze will not flow into the areas that have no flux.
Yeah, and that's something I don't think a lot of average tinkerers know with the flux. There's a big difference.
It kind of washes the path that your liquid metal needs to go before the liquid metal gets there, is the best I can put it.
No, that's a good illustration for it, I would say. But all cool things. It definitely correlates with what you've dealt with through your personal experiences. So, but I know with the truck driving. Chapter. I'm sorry, what?
It was a fun chapter in my life.
Oh, absolutely. I could see that being one of the more enjoyable bits. There's
well, as a teenager, you're starting out in the world. You're still, you haven't stepped out completely on your own yet, and but you know that this is a skill that most people don't have. So I went into my adult life with that. Yeah, I can do things the average person doesn't have any clue about. So
yeah, there's a special title that comes with just having pride in the work you do. Like knowing that you've done quality work will bring you far in improving your happiness. I definitely would agree with that.
Yeah, I'll say you don't know till you try, and if you fail, you might as well try again, because third time's the charm. And if by the third time you don't get it, maybe you should be in a different line of work.
Yeah, there's no shame in trying things out, though. Having natural curiosity is a good thing, arguably. So,
yes.
But with the whole orientation around curiosity, let's switch this to home gardening. I know that you have experience being a green thumb, and is there anything you want to open up to share with the audience?
I enjoy being out in the garden. There's a certain feedback you get when you put your hands in the soil. Some people call it grounding or earthing, or walking around barefoot. And it reconnects you with earth. There's an energy that comes from the earth, and it synchronizes within your body once you connect to the earth. that's part of it. And I didn't understand that until just recently, that, you know, that's where the good feelings I got working with the soil, that's where they came from. You know,
it has to do with frequency.
Schumann resonance and energy vibrations. The earth has a heartbeat. It's called the Schumann resonance.
Huh. And that's something from the thermal activity and just like the balance of how everything's layered.
No, it's actually an energy frequency.
Oh, wow.
Radiates from the earth. And it doesn't have to do with volcanoes or magma or anything like that.
So nothing thermal. It's all actually energy based. Interesting.
Yes, and it can be measured. There's a gentleman. His name was Schumann. It was spelled Schumann. I think 2 N's on the end. And he was using electronics, and he discovered basically the heartbeat of the earth. And it's called the Schumann resonance.
Huh. That's honestly something I would really love to research. I know I've heard some things about through soil science that there's different frequencies that kind of come through that, you know, they track, but I didn't know about the energy direct source.
Just about everybody knows that quartz crystals will vibrate at a certain frequency, and if you put pressure on them, you can change that frequency, and that's how the early radios were made. They used crystals and pressure to go from station to station.
Really? Yeah, I never knew that, actually.
You know, and it's all done electronically now, but originally it all started with crystals, and each elemental crystal, quartz is one, have their own frequencies.
Yeah, that makes sense. So they would just use different elements of crystals.
Well, everything that they came from is the planet itself, and that has its own frequency. And I don't want to get into the flat Earth, round Earth, and all that. we could discuss that.
No, but
at another time.
All natural stuff. It's very amazing. Truly.
Mm-hmm.
Truly.
But back to gardening. One, I enjoyed putting my hands in the soil. Two, I enjoyed things that it gave back to me. You know, I could pick a pepper or a tomato and say, yeah, you know, this wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me putting it in the soil to begin with, you know. But back to trucking for a minute, I didn't have a lot of extra time. I was on the road constantly, sometimes 16 hours a day. So I tried to find shortcuts into my gardening. I would mulch with black plastic. I would run drip irrigation under the black plastic. And then I would plant at each dripper so that I wasn't wasting water. This was Sacramento area, so it's hot and dry, and sometimes there's water restrictions. So I used as little water as I could get away with. It was on a timer. I didn't have to come home and turn it on and turn it off. It could just operate while I was on the road somewhere. And then I would grow my tomatoes vertically on concrete reinforcing wire. I cut panels about 10 feet long, and I would put fencing T-posts through the plastic, and I would put it through the concrete reinforcing wire so it would stand up. It would be about 4 feet tall and 10 feet long, and it would look like a fence. And then I would grow tomatoes or peppers every other square. They were 6 inches apart. So every foot I would have a tomato plant, and I would grow it vertically up this concrete reinforcing wire. So it created a vertical garden. I could increase my gardening space that way.
How ingenious. It's really great to be able to compact what you're doing, and with something like that, you just get the most bang out of your buck according to the land.
Mm-hmm. You know, and they sell all kinds of tomato cages. Those upside down cone shaped ones. Those are the worst. I can't stand those.
Yeah, they're a little tricky to maneuver, aren't they?
Well, once the tomato gets up into the top of those, it's so top heavy it just flops over.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do to keep it up, you know, with that concrete reinforcing wire.
Oh, I'm sure that worked a lot better.
You know, it was nice and flat. I could walk down I would plant usually two of them end to end. I had 20-foot row. And then that would give me my, and I would have one at each end. So that would give me, 11 or 12 plants. And then I didn't have to go digging around inside the tomato plant to find tomatoes that were ripe. They were just hanging there on this fence. And then at the end of the season, I would yank the fences and posts up. I would roll up the plastic. I would roll up my drip irrigation, and then I'd be ready for the next year's season.
So pack in, pack out, essentially.
The plastic kept the weeds down. I never had to weed anything. Water was done on a timer, and all I did was basically I put things in the spring, and then I would pick the right fruit as it matured.
So you would almost say precision is important in cases where you're restricted on water use.
I'm a big fan of drip irrigation. It puts the water right where you need it, and it only gives you what you need. And you put it on a timer. You can get drippers that put out at different rates. I like the pressure compensating drippers because the one closest to the water source, if they're not compensating, the one closest to the water source will water more than the one all the way at the far end, just because the pressure drops by the time it gets there. But with a pressure compensating dripper, once that pressure comes up close to the water source, it only gives out a certain amount of water, and then the water has to go to the next dripper and create pressure.
Oh,
so it pressurizes the entire line all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And they're pressure compensating drippers so that they all put out the same pressure at the same time, as opposed to more here at this end and very little at the far end. Especially if you run it up a slight incline from your water source, you're going to want pressure compensating drippers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see how that's a very useful tool, especially with, again, like the distance. Trying to run some of those lines can be tricky.
Mm-hmm. It's the drip irrigation, the tubing that they have some that have the drippers already installed every 6 inches or 12 inches. And you just roll it out and plant next to the hole in the hose, and you're good to go. And they last for many years unless you cut it with a weed eater or a lawnmower or something, which happens.
Oh yeah. I know. Working on different farms, that definitely happens. More than a lot of people would like to admit.
Mm-hmm. So if you have flat ground, the I want to say pre-drilled holes, but they're not really drilled. They're just openings. Those are the way to go. It makes things much easier. You just roll it out and plant next to the holes. If you don't have a grid-like garden, if you have a plant here and a plant there and then a plant way over there, then you want a solid hose where you put your own drippers in where you need them. And that's where the PC drippers come in.
So there's different variations depending on what uses you have.
Right.
Cool stuff.
The ones that you punch the hole and then you insert your dripper wherever you want, those will come in a half a gallon an hour, 2 gallons an hour, so that you can give one plant more water than another plant.
Well, still like obtaining the same amount of pressure, even though you're dripping different amounts. correct?
Right. One plant may be thirstier than another, so it needs more water. So the pressure is the same with the PC drippers, but it's just giving 2 gallons an hour to one plant and only a half gallon an hour to another.
And they just
like the lavender doesn't need 2 gallons an hour for drippers.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Tomato plants might.
That's true. Yeah, especially the fruits. The turgor pressure, right?
Say that again?
The turgor pressure. Trying to keep the skin of the plant healthy.
Oh, yes. Maintain the same positive pressure throughout the plant.
With that, is there any advice you would give to the new gardening person? With California's hot summers, there's some tricky tendencies with the weather that it may not always be as wet as you'd hope. So, and I know you mentioned the drip irrigation, but is there any techniques with soil or generally like using certain tools, trying to avoid certain tools?
When I was talking about the black plastic, I used that as a mulch to kind of hold moisture into the soil and also reduce weed growth. And you could do that with mulches as well. They make a biodegradable cardboard roll that you could put out instead of black plastic or white plastic, clear plastic. The plastic allows you to soil solarize, which kills weed seeds and stuff in the soil.
Just through the heat, correct?
From heat and UV, yeah. If it's a black plastic, it'll be the heat, and then if it's a clear plastic, it'll be a UV as well.
Gotcha. So it's also creating like a micro greenhouse effect.
Right. Soil solarization is what it's called. You could do that. That happens when you use black plastic or clear plastic as a mulch to reduce weed growth, and you leave it on all season. You can use regular bagged mulch, or if you make your own compost, you could mulch with compost, a nice thick layer, and it does wonders for the soil too. Black plastic doesn't add anything to the soil as far as nutrients, but a good thick compost layer will. I have found that making a compost pile and then moving it, the pile leaves behind a beautiful spot to plant stuff in. Which it surprised me, but it didn't. You know, what surprised me was that I didn't know about it a lot earlier.
Yeah, that's fair, especially with just the natural erosion of leaves and different biodegradable things. It works quick. It works quick in the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a good hot compost pile will break down stuff in just a couple of months. I don't keep my compost piles hot, just because I've got so many other things going on that I don't really have a lot of time to mess with it. I did get some soaker hoses that I will put on top of the pile to help keep it wet in those hot summer days. That's my biggest problem, is the compost pile drying out and stopping the composting action. But I have a friend that drops off. He does yard work. He breaks up leaves in the fall. He does grass clippings, and he brings them over. And I told him as long as they don't have any weed and feed chemicals on them, he can drop off as much as he wants. So he's helping me make compost.
Nice. Yeah, so you have a little community relationship right there. Little connection.
He doesn't have to pay to get rid of it at the transfer station. It's not going in the landfill. And I get usable soil out of it. So it's a win-win-win for everybody but Waste Management. They don't make money on it.
Well, yeah, I would say that's a good thing. Generally, if you can make someone's efforts a little easier and then improve your own standing, especially when it comes to your garden, that's a very important thing to keep healthy.
And another tip for a new gardener would be try just about everything. Some things will grow better for you and some things won't. And a lot of it is location specific. So, you know, there could be two gardeners 10 miles from each other, and one can grow fantastic tomatoes and the other one can grow fantastic weeds. So, you know.
Well, yeah, and that touches into agricultural diversity. We definitely need more bees, and to obtain bees, there's certain bee species that only use nectar off of some certain wildflowers, and
yes.
Others that only work off of the fruits. So, and that's something people miss out a lot.
The solitary bees, you know, everybody thinks of a bee, they think of a honeybee, but the solitary bees probably do as much or more pollination than the honeybees do. They come out first. They live for about 6 weeks or so. They come out and they pollinate and they lay eggs and then they die. They don't live in a hive like the honeybees do. They don't have a community. They're solitary bees, mason bees, and they hatch. They go pollinate. They lay eggs, and then that's it. And they don't interact with each other except to mate.
It's very bizarre compared to the honeybee. Like it's a whole different way of life for that little bee.
Yeah, I've been buying mason bees. There are people that go out and collect them. They usually lay their eggs in reeds along creeks, and there are people that go out and identify the nests and cut the reeds and sell them in gardening supply stores. There's one I go to in Reno that has they sell mason bees, and so I bought a selection of 5 different kinds of mason bees, and they'll hatch at different times and they'll pollinate different flowers. They do a lot of early fruit tree pollinating for the peaches and the plums, so they're beneficial.
Yeah, and then,
as much as the honeybee is. And the other thing is, put out a water feature. Anything with some shell, I don't know, like a bird bath with a rock in it, and you will attract bees to your garden just with the water. They need water as much as, and when it's really hot, they use water for air conditioning on the hive. The honeybees do. So a water feature will bring in more pollinators to your garden than some place that doesn't have any water for them to drink.
Yeah, that's very true. And just a question I had about the mason bees. Do you have experience with them repopulating those eggs in your pond? Yes.
I pick up every year. I pick up a couple of. I think they have a cluster of 4 different kinds, and then a little box of a 5th kind. And I've released those for the last 3 years now. I have some to release this spring once it warms up and the snow goes away.
How neat. That's really cool.
But once they're here, they will stay here. They will come back to where they hatched to lay their eggs. If you leave the little tubes that they came in a secure location, like I have them on the east side of my back patio, and they actually make mason bee houses that the bees can come back to and make their nest in.
Oh, that's
and
really
cool. Success with that as well.
Yeah, I had no idea that they made anything like that for the mason bees.
It's like a little birdhouse, only it has a bunch of little holes drilled into one side of it. And the mason bees, they'll go in at the bottom of the hole and they'll lay an egg and they'll put up a mud dam, and then they'll lay a second egg. And what they do is they'll sting a caterpillar, a grub, and put it in with the egg. So when the baby wasp hatches, it has a food source in its little chamber.
Oh, so
and
that's
then
why they build them like
they'll
that.
stack 6 or 8 chambers deep in each reed, so that the last egg laid is the first one to hatch and eat its way out, basically, as an adult.
How bizarre. That's so cool how nature has its way of nutrition, too.
Mm-hmm. And nobody likes wasps, but they do a good job in the garden, too, because every egg that a wasp queen lays needs a grub for food in the same way as the mason bees do. So
they're always
wasps are beneficial, even though they're nasty little buggers.
Oh yeah, but they're keeping pest control.
They're for pest control. That's right. Yes.
Well,
so don't be too quick. I kill the wasps near doorways and stuff, but the ones way out in the open, I don't mess with them. They're doing a job.
Yeah. As long as they're not on the active jet front, we're okay.
Right.
Well, speaking on that, what's some of the most important animals to have in your garden that you would argue have benefited you the most?
I really like my chickens, and I like to let them out. They dig and scratch, and they make a mess, but they eat weeds, they eat bugs, they eat a ton of earwigs, and they leave some nice fertilizer behind.
No kidding.
And they aerate the top of the soil, and scratching up any fresh weeds that might be starting to grow. So I would call them a beneficial. And then we have a Jack Russell Terrier, which takes care of rodents every now and then. We have gopher problems, so I encourage her to dispatch as many of those as she can.
Yeah, those can be.
All my planting areas are mostly raised beds with hardware cloth at the bottom to keep the rodents out, to keep the gophers out. Which is another tip: plant a raised bed with a hardware cloth wire at the bottom, so that it's isolated from the surrounding soil. So the only thing that gets in is worms, basically.
You can you'll take worms every day.
I'll take worms. Yes.
Yeah, worms are great. Worms are great. They're loved.
Worm castings. I clean my chicken coop out and I put it on my gardens or in my compost pile.
Well, here's a question for you. Are maggots typically beneficial for the garden?
What are?
Maggots?
Fly larvae? Not especially. They break down dead animal matter mostly. So if you've got a bunch of gophers dying underground, then they'll take care of them for you.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they're the precursor to a pest problem.
Well,
the chickens do attract flies. I just learned of a nice thing for the chicken coop that I knew about before, but I didn't know about it in the chicken coop, was biochar. Take charcoal and kind of crumble it up and throw it in the chicken coop, and it will absorb odor.
Huh.
And it'll absorb, and it also absorbs nutrients. And then you put that in your compost pile, and it breaks down and releases nutrients into the compost.
That's really neat. That's a really good tip for people with chickens.
Yeah, you take some charcoal, whether it's, if you like to smoke meat on a smoker, you could take the spent charcoal from the smoking wood, and you don't really want the ash, you want the charcoal. Basically it's a burned piece of wood at low temperature with low oxygen, so that it preserves the wood as charcoal as opposed to burning it through and turning into ash.
No, I may be wrong, but the ash has nitrogen in it, correct?
Ash is good for the soil as well. And you could add it as a supplement as well. But it as far as the chicken coop, the ash won't do for you what the charcoal will.
Yeah, so it has to do more with the semi-burned pieces rather than the incinerated ones, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
And you don't want to use charcoal that you like charcoal briquettes. You don't want to use any of that. That's got chemicals in it.
Yeah.
You want basically you could start a small fire with some limbs off of your tree prunings, and then cover it with like a metal sheet so that it has enough oxygen to keep combusting, but not enough oxygen to burn through and turn into ash. You want a low oxygen fire, and that'll give you your charcoal. And then you can take that, put it in your chicken coop, and that process, the chickens will activate it for you. So by the time the chickens are done with it, it'll reduce odor, and you'll have an activated charcoal you can use in your garden.
Well, how neat. That's something I had never actually heard of.
The technical term is biochar. They've been doing it in the Amazon forest for centuries. The indigenous people, they've been mixing charcoal with the soil for centuries in South America.
That's probably why the forest is so vast in a lot of regions too. It's a special. The rainforest is special in that it doesn't have. There's no nutrients in the soil. The nutrients basically are absorbed as they break down before they ever get to the soil. Wow.
So there's a special biome. So and that's the problem. Once they clear cut for cattle or for a single crop, the soil's depleted, and then the rainforest doesn't grow back again.
Yeah. So it's just lost.
It's lost because the soil is so fragile in that region.
It's absolutely tragic that people think clear cutting a land like that is beneficial, especially with that kind of environment. They should know the risks to doing something like that.
Yeah, it started 100 years ago, industrialization and that kind of thing, expanding the beef markets, and so it's been going on for a long time, longer than I've been alive. So it's not. There is attention that's being drawn to it, and reforestation groups, which is good to see, but they haven't stopped the clear cutting process. Now, clear cutting itself is not really bad for some forests, like the conifer forests out in the West. The indigenous people would burn portions of the forest so that it would clear areas, and then the game would come, the deer, the elk. It would have a place to graze. A thick forest has no grass for the animals to eat. No wheat, it's basically all trees, and deer and elk don't eat trees.
Yeah, and we've seen where that leads to.
Clear cutting's not bad. However, if it's done in a patchwork, it's very beneficial for the forest. It's beneficial for the animals. So it's gotten a bad rap.
Because it's industrialized. Like at least over in South America, with the combination.
Now the rainforest, it's a different kind of forest, so it doesn't take to the clear cutting like the conifer forests here in America.
Yeah.
But it started out with industrialization out in the West when the gold rush started. They just started cutting trees like crazy, but there were the native peoples here were already using fire to clear areas. well, and it was a benefit to them and also to the forest. There are some conifer trees that the seed won't sprout unless it's gone through a fire, like the sequoia.
Yeah.
They have to go through a fire before they'll even sprout.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes years for some of those seeds to burst.
Right.
Yeah, I remember.
So fire and clear cutting is not necessarily bad, but the volume of it in one area could be bad.
Yeah, and that's where moderation is definitely a factor when it comes to what kind of control the weather gives you, because Mother Nature has its ways of bursting in and shifting things around.
Well, if you look lately in the last decade or so, we've had all these gigantic fires out in the West, forest fires year after year, more and more every year, and it's part of the problem is there are not open spaces in the forest. The forest is too dense, but the activists want to save every single tree, so they have a louder voice, and they lobby the state officials, and the state officials say, okay, we're not going to allow clear cutting anymore. The National Forest Service, they don't put fires out. They manage them, and sometimes they don't manage them very well. They manage them right through cities, through towns.
Yeah.
So they are not focused on the ultimate health of the forest. They're focused on this.
It's like the
I think they're a little misguided in their goals, if you ask me.
Yeah, and that's a flaw in the system, right? There's people that you can't necessarily depend on to keep proper order with these things and proper routine. And that's something the natives respected, because they understood they lived off the land. They required the land to be healthy.
Right. Well, and they watched what nature did. Nature lights fires and burns parts of the forest, and then they come back more lush with more animals, and they just followed that technique, and they handed it down from generation to generation. When industrialization hit America in the, I'd say late 1800s, the gold rush started, and people just flooded in here, and all they wanted was the gold. There were a few people that would do the farming and stuff that would protect the land, but anybody that came out here for gold, they're just digging everywhere, they didn't care.
Yeah.
And then I would say after World War II, the the Forest Service changed their policies to we're not going to put out fires. They started putting out every little fire, but now it's to the point, well, we're just going to let the fire burn, and now they're getting million-acre fires. So they went from one extreme to another, it seems.
Yeah, that's the trouble with it, is this balance. There's not a distinct order to what happens first. It's kind of like situational. So if they could actually properly organize that into something that's standardized, forest health would definitely increase.
Yeah, and every year there's more and more that's learned. It's a lot of it is that there are people at the top that have all these degrees from all these universities, but they know they're smart, and other people know they're smart, but they may not be doing the best that they possibly can under the circumstances. And they really only know what they've learned. There's very few of them that will go beyond what they learned in a university to add that to their skills as far as forestry goes. The people that are running the agencies that take care of the forest, they don't go out in the forest with a chainsaw. They're sitting behind a desk. So, they may never even see the forest after their field trips in college.
Yeah, that's why it's important to talk to people.
Bureaucracy. You're fighting bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's an actual disconnect visually even.
Yeah.
Which is really, really unfortunate. This is something that they should know. It's something they should really be experts of the field of, even if they don't have the years to necessarily compensate. The hands-on visuals, still talking to the workforce and having an understanding properly of the respect these people have for what they do, just as important.
Yeah, a lot of that is the problem of bureaucracy. The bureaucracy wants a person that's qualified in these areas and with these degrees, and the job that they're doing is just telling people how to do their job. They're disconnected from the forest.
Yeah.
At a minimum. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to be said with this whole forest fire situation, the health of the forest. So that's something in the future I think can touch base on more, because it's an active discussion, to say the least. Well, after Australia's fires, I think people understand that there's a big risk to our biodiversity if we don't take care of our forests. So it's something we should all open on our radar and keep open ears for, on how to improve, even if it's local communities. We need each other. We need each other in emergency situations like that.
Yes, and there's a lot of talk on the internet about bug out shelters and bug out vehicles and how to go off grid and survive on your own, and to be realistic, you need a community. The community helps each other, whereas a single individual doesn't really have time in their day to do everything a community can. A community, one person can grow food, another person can produce eggs, another person can make alcohol, which could be used medicinally. A distillery, 90% grain alcohol, it could be used medicinally, not just consumed for pleasure.
Absolutely.
It can be used for wound dressings and sanitation and that kind of thing. So there's skills that each individual of a community that would be very hard to duplicate in an individual or a family setting out in the woods by themselves.
Absolutely. Well,
not that there's not somebody that can do that, but the average person who thinks they can just bug out into the woods if everything, if the peanut butter hits the fan, so to speak, they can just get in their vehicle and go out in the woods and survive for years on end. That's not realistic.
No, it's really not, especially if you don't understand the cycle of the seasons and the difference in the environment you're living in. Because it gets cold, man. Even in the valley of warm California, it gets cold.
Well, warm California, where I am right now, we just had 14 inches of snow in the last 24 hours. We had a 3-day break from the last storm, which delivered 30 inches of snow. So we're sitting on almost 4 feet of snow right now.
Oh, wow. Well, that's perfect for our next question, actually. Which plants, in your experience, do the best through the cold?
I put garlic in before the snows came. That's sitting under the snow, waiting for it all to go away. I won't worry about having to water that.
Yeah, no kidding.
For quite some time.
That garlic will be nice and happy.
There's several herbs that you can grow and that you can still harvest through the winter, like lemon thyme, or just any of the thymes. They'll change colors, but they still have some nice flavor to them. You can harvest through the winter.
Nice.
And I've noticed there are some mint varieties that will not completely die back to the, especially if it's got a snow cover. That'll keep it right at 32 degrees. It won't get any colder.
Really? Yeah, I didn't know mint actually had good frost resistance like that.
I keep mint in containers because otherwise it would take over my garden beds. And I also plant thyme in containers, and another winter herb is rosemary. That one needs to be in the ground, but you can harvest that all winter long too.
Huh. And they have a natural resistance, huh?
Yeah, they're pretty cold tolerant, in my opinion. Other things, there are the bulbs you plant in the fall, like daffodils, narcissus, hyacinths. Those things are all overwinter really nice. In fact, they kind of need the winter to kick them off in the spring. And then as far as edibles, there's the cabbage and the cole crops, the cabbage family crops, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, that kind of stuff. They'll tolerate the cold. They won't really grow until the spring gets, but you can plant them for harvest into the fall as the winter's starting, and then you can, if you have a warm place to start them, you can start them in the winter, and then when the spring gets here, they'll take off.
That's really cool.
Carrots, you can grow up into the winter, and they will store really well underground, unless you have gophers.
Yes. Yeah, those gophers love that.
And then the other things are spinach, lettuce, kale, and some of the flowers are Johnny Jump Ups, pansies, primroses. Those are pretty tough winter. They'll get a little ragged, but they'll survive the winter.
Have you ever, miner's lettuce, correct?
I've heard of it, but I haven't had any. I know it grows around here, but
yes, it's pretty good actually. It's kind of looks like a aquatic plant almost. Like I wish I knew the name. So it's kind of like a micro lily pad though, connected with like a stem in the middle. But I've always wondered how those survive through the winter. I think they just die back and then kind of burst in. They must have like seeds that drop near the fall, but I've never quite discovered because some of the plants get pretty big.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. Miner's lettuce is something that just grows naturally all over the place out here. There are many plants that do that that have medicinal value too. Mullein.
Oh yeah.
That grows wonderfully out here. There's all, each area of the country will have different plants that are native that most people just, they walk right by them or weed eat them out of their garden, and they're perfectly viable as a food product or a medicinal.
Yeah, it's a struggle trying to get people to understand the different uses, because there's so many plants with multiple different things to use them for. But that's something I've always hated, is the whole weed killer, spray pesticides to cut down a whole quote unquote trash crop. There's certain very, very seldom situations that should merit such an excuse to spray things down with pesticides. All you're doing is contaminating the area for food and water, which is
right. Well,
stupid.
You know, they say that it breaks down within 24 hours in the soil.
yeah. I'm sure that's a very truthful statement.
You know, you touched on a subject that I started out when I first got my house using, you know, like a weed and feed and stuff like that, and then you know, it didn't feel right for me, and I just quit after a while. Just because I was already mulching my garden, so I didn't have to worry about weeds there. I just ran over it with a weed eater instead when they started to grow in the areas I didn't want them, as opposed to poisoning them. And, you know, I did that just for myself. I wasn't trying to make a statement or anything. It just didn't feel right to be doing it and then eating the stuff right next to it. But a lot of the genetically modified crops out there are modified so that they can take more and more pesticide use. That's why they're modified. They're not modified to taste better. They're not modified to produce more plant product. They're there to withstand. They're modified to withstand pesticide use right directly on them. So, and a lot of the pests that they're spraying are becoming resistant to the pesticides, so they have to spray more and more and more often. And it's a vicious cycle, and it's going to end at a collapse at one point for being able to genetically modify the crops anymore to spraying that much. So
we can't be doing that. That's not a long-term solution. And this is something people need to understand, that it's going to affect kids. It's going to affect future generations of man and bugs. It's not just us we have to keep in mind.
Well, and it goes along with monocropping, because the farmers that are using that technique are farming more and more and more acres of the same crop.
Yes,
so
that's not natural.
They're using that. You know, it started out, it gave those farmers an advantage over the neighboring farms, because the neighboring farms, their crops were competing with the weeds compared to the GMO crops, so that they were able to bring in more at the end of the season. Well, that allowed them to buy neighboring farms and increase their land holdings to the point where they're now gigantic companies with large holdings of land that are growing the same crop everywhere. And it's not healthy for the ecosystem. Monocrops, the bananas are a perfect example of monocropping gone bad. There was, during the 40s and early 50s, the banana of choice was called a Gros Michel. It was a wonderful banana, and it almost became extinct because of a bacterial disease called black sigatoka, because that was the only banana that was being farmed worldwide. The black sigatoka almost wiped out all the bananas that were being produced. They had to switch to another variety called the Cavendish, which is what you find in your stores now. You can't really, you have to buy a sport and grow it yourself if you want the Gros Michel banana. They found some in some British greenhouses that were protected, and they have been, they thought it was an extinct variety, and they have been expanding. You can buy them online now, sports that you can plant yourself.
But yeah, that's an absolute danger when people don't diversify their crops. The seedless varieties too, I've heard there's a problem with that.
Yeah, they're seedless. They've been chosen for lower and lower seeds, because the ones that produce seeds don't have very flavorful flesh, and they have to be cooked. They're more of a plantain. And then the ones that are chosen to be seedless have a genetic, it's a genetic trait that keeps them from growing seeds. They are propagated by root cuttings. So you take a sport off the root, and it's basically a clone of the mother plant. So all the Cavendish bananas that you see in the store are all clones of one another.
That's
you can go from
so similar.
You know, it is still a monocrop, worldwide monocrop.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they're not. It's only the small gardeners and farmers. I love bananas. I had several of them when I lived down in the Sacramento area. It was a zone 9, so it was challenging in the winter, but I found varieties that I could carry through to the spring, and I had even produced edible bananas. But you know, if it wasn't for people like me that were just going out and buying weird banana varieties, that Gros Michel would not have. It would be still in that greenhouse, you know, pretty much thought of as dead.
Well, and that's part of the advantage of having a greenhouse during the winter is you're able to keep hold of some of these more fragile species.
Mm-hmm. I have one banana left. It's called the snow banana, the Chinese snow banana. And it's not an edible. It's an ornamental. And it has started flowering like 2 weeks ago. In the greenhouse.
How neat.
It doesn't know it's winter. That's why its name is a snow banana. It would frequently pop up through the snow as a flower.
Oh, wow.
And basically the banana flower is a cluster of flowers. And the color you get of the bloom is the modified leaves around the little flowers. Kind of like a sunflower has all those little tiny flowers.
Yeah.
On each sunflower head, that's similar to a banana. You know, there's many flowers on one flower that comes out.
That's really neat.
And they're loaded with nectar right now. I feel bad for the hummingbirds that can't get to it.
They
just
love
loaded.
Huh?
I took a picture. The flowers are just totally full of nectar. So sweet.
Oh man. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. On the lines of moving forward, we have a question about some of your county waste management experience. You've had years in this industry. Is there something within the recycling aspect of waste facilities that you feel people misunderstand?
Waste management has come the business of waste management, not necessarily the company. The management of waste has come a long way from even the 60s and 70s. The process of a landfill is when they open a new space, they'll dig a hole, a pit, and then they'll line it with sand or put a liner down or put sensors down there in case there's a hole in the liner. They know it, even though it's under a couple 100 feet of trash. And then they'll put more sand in there, and then they'll finally start putting in some soft trash like green waste type trash that won't poke through the liner, and then they start piling the regular garbage on it. And the product that a landfill sells is the space your garbage goes into. That's their product. So the more they can smash it, and the more they can remove from the waste stream by sending it through recycling or green waste facility, the smaller that airspace package has to be, so they can put more garbage in the same space. So as far as the whole recycling thing, a lot of municipalities will give you extra cans for recycling. I worked at the landfill in Sacramento County, and the county would give you 2 green waste cans, 1 recycle bin, and 1 trash bin. And a lot of people now just separate their own waste out so that only a small portion goes to the landfill itself. There's a lot of private companies that pick up trash that don't necessarily give you those options. and everything they pick up, you know, all your lawn clippings and stuff like that, go into the garbage and into the landfill. And we had our own county trucks picking up county waste, bringing it to the landfill, but we also had private companies picking up waste from the smaller cities, bringing it to the same landfill, but it was not separated like ours was. So there's more that can be done in smaller municipalities where they use private companies. If the private companies can be encouraged to separate the green waste out and separate out recyclables, that's nothing but a good thing in the end.
Yeah, it creates a smoother process overall. That makes total sense. Now, how effective is this recycling process? Do you feel like there's a true upcycle, or are we losing potential resource by letting trash pile instead of trying to reduce household waste overall?
A lot of those areas have come a long way. The average person is more conscious about recycling. You know, there's always going to be the guy that throws the bottle in the garbage as opposed to putting it in a separate recycle container. He just doesn't want to be bothered. But as far as reusing a lot of those materials, that's come a long way. There's more work to do, but it's come a long way in the last, say, 25 years. The other thing is people have started doing their own compost piles at home and reusing their yard waste in their own space as opposed to sending it off to the landfill. So as far as those things, it's already come a long way. Even though there's a lot more to do, it's got to come down more to making the individual aware of what it means to either recycle that can or throw it in the garbage. I'd like to see maybe instead of the pharmaceutical ads on TV and radio that they have recycling ads instead. You know, every 5 minutes you hear about some new drug and with a list of side effects up to and including death, and you know, and they replay it every 10 minutes and whenever they go to a news break, but you never hear anything about recycling, you know?
That's true. That's true.
There's no money in it.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a reason for that, isn't there?
The pharmaceuticals make all kinds of money in the recycling, you know, like where I'm at now, they shut the recycling center down where you can get money back for your recyclables. So there's a lot of people that say, I'm not going to go just sit in line at the transfer station so that I can just turn my recyclables in for nothing. It's just a waste of my time. So they end up throwing it in the garbage. There has to be more proactive efforts. And I don't know if it'll be, giving people money for the recyclers or what, but there has to be more impetus for the average person to recycle.
Yeah, absolutely. The benefits are not mutual in a lot of people's eyes. They're taking time from the person because the person's just a distributor of their own purchased goods. So I can see where people lose interest quick.
You pay your redemption value, your whatever your deposit is, when you buy your product, and then you come home, but you have no way of getting that money back now. So it's going to take you more time out of your day to sort that and take it into the recycler than in just throwing it in the trash. So, you know, you've already paid for that product, and now you're going to pay even more with your time to go turn it back in. That doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Yeah.
Making it to where people are more engaged, which is what the recycling centers did. I feel like it got the community more engaged. Even homeless people were grabbing cans and things out of the trash themselves in some of these bigger cities. And
right.
For a lot of them, I mean, I had regulars in San Francisco who would ask for cans.
Right.
That was just a thing to do daily because they knew they could
make money. It was income for the homeless, and it was also cleaning up a messy problem.
Yeah, I think
so it was a win-win.
Yeah, I truly think it was a great idea. I don't know why it got removed in a few communities. I know that some communities still carry them, but you would think there'd be more of a push because of that local involvement. But
yeah. The facility needs a person to operate it. Yeah. So you're talking about an employee that with a paycheck. You got to support that. Just closing the site down, you're still getting some people to bring you recyclable that you can turn into the state for money, because the waste management company is still turning it into the state for cash. They're getting their money out of it. It's just that the consumer no longer gets the money that they paid at the store back, or has an opportunity to do that unless they go out of town. They drive a lot of miles to go to another community that has a recycle redemption center.
Totally.
And now you're using a lot of fuel and more time. So
yeah,
we're just trying to get your 20 cents back out of your Coke bottle.
Exactly. It's not,
you know what I mean?
But
so there's a lot of issues that need to be worked out with the recycling. It's great that it's as big as it is today. That's fantastic. We recycle hundreds of thousands of tons of material every year that goes back into products. But there could be more done.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's processes that, if taken the time, we could definitely work out something more efficient to where even a local community could maybe repurpose some of that stuff for 3D printing, maybe. Not to say that you'd want all that plastic 3D printed necessarily, because I know it's a different quality for things, but there's ideas. There's new tech that can definitely change the way we view some of our consumables.
Right. 3D printing is a great point that you bring up, because a lot of recycled plastic goes into the filament that they sell for the 3D printers.
Yeah, that was something I was wondering.
It's already being turned into an end product. It's just the quality of the filament, and that depends on who's recycling that plastic into the filament. That company, if they have shoddy quality, then you're going to have a shoddy filament.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, you get what you give.
So, there's some good, and then there's not so good. So that's a great point you bring up, though, 3D printing. And 3D printing can take care of a lot of the replacement part industry as well. That China shut down with their manufacturing shutdown. They would make a lot of our replacement parts for a lot of things, little plastic cogs and stuff like that. And I think if the industry here in America, if the printers got cheaper and the technology got more mention, if there were more college classes that taught how to use a 3D printer and what to do with it and that kind of thing, I think the 3D printing industry would just take right off.
Oh, I agree. There's so much use for 3D printing technology.
And
a lot of people don't even know.
Speaking of gardening, they have 3D printers that'll garden.
Really?
Yeah. They'll go up and down a track over a bed, and they'll plant. They'll pull weeds or zap them with a laser. No pesticides. They'll water automatically. They'll go up and down a track, and they've got the 3D printer head that'll actually, one will push seeds into the ground, and another has a little sprayer on it. And they have one with tweezers that'll reach down and grab weeds and yank them.
Crazy. I've never heard about the lasers. That's a really ingenious idea.
Laser weed removal, and you put a gigantic solar panel on top of it, and that way you can, keep it recharged. You don't have to run a power cord out to it. You're running off of batteries. It's like a little trolley.
It's neat stuff. It's very, very neat stuff.
Yeah, that's been out for, probably going on 10 years now, that technology.
Well, speaking of equipment, is there anything on the landfill that you felt was the most effective for the role that you had to kind of partake?
Yeah, the equipment, that's really developed with the landfill industry. We were running D9 dozers, which are gigantic, running compactors like the compactors you see on asphalt jobs on the highway where they're compacting the asphalt.
Yes.
So that these are similar, except they have a drum on each corner. They have 4 drums, and the drums have points. Kind of, they're like pads. They're spiky drums, and it allows the drum to penetrate farther into the surface and compact deeper. And the machines are weighing I think 105,000 pounds.
Wow.
So you got 25,000 pounds per drum pushing down on trash.
Yeah,
so
it's crushing power indeed.
the only way you could increase that would be to make the compactors and the dozers bigger.
Yeah. As if that's not enough.
As if they're not big enough, yeah.
I know. It's crazy powerful.
But, yeah. So, the industry is very old, and they've really fine-tuned it. The best part about the landfill industry is that they have started removing the recyclables and the green waste. They're using green waste every night when the people go home from the landfill. They have to cover the garbage. So they have these gigantic 20-foot wide tarps that are 50 feet long, and they unroll it over the open garbage that they're going to put more in the next day. It doesn't make sense to cover it with soil or green waste because they're just going to keep putting more trash in it the next day, so they cover it with a tarp. And the reason they cover is to keep wildlife from eating garbage. That's one of their mandates. They're not allowed to let seagulls and any other wildlife eat trash. So they have to have it covered when nobody's there. They only have the part uncovered that is being worked. So it's the industry has really developed nicely to where we're not putting as much in the landfill as we used to. I would say a good 40%, 35 to 40% has been removed from the waste stream.
Just for general repurposing?
Right, for the recycles and the green waste.
That's fantastic.
There are some places that will, like the green waste that comes from the houses, they have a lot of grass clippings in it. They can't really use that as power because the BTUs aren't in it. It won't burn hot enough to create power for them. So that will be used as a cover over garbage, knowing that they're going to come back to that area. So they have to cover the garbage, but they cover it with green waste instead of soil. That way they can put more trash on top of the green waste that's already there. And this is green waste that can't be used for another industry. But the tree trimmings and stuff that people bring in, the smaller contractors, the tree pruners and that will dump their waste in a separate area, and that will be hauled out to a power manufacturer. They'll chip it up and they'll use it to create power. It's a renewable resource. And all that stuff used to just go into the garbage before. So
yeah,
they separate out the electronics, the e-waste, that kind of stuff. They have separate areas for batteries, whether it's lithium or lead acid. You can bring your old batteries in there. They even have an area for old pesticides and stuff like that. And we had free pesticide. You know, you could drop off X amount of pesticide each trip to the landfill, and they didn't charge you for it, which keeps them out of the waste stream or dumping down the toilet.
Totally. Yeah, there's a bunch of organization steps that I think a lot of people miss in the smaller towns.
Yeah, smaller towns are a little different. Small towns around the big city, the trash all goes to the same landfill. So the smaller communities around the Sacramento area still sent their trash to the Sacramento landfill. It was just done by a private company. But like the more rural a community is, the farther that truck has to go with the garbage. So the more that you can separate out and use locally will reduce the carbon footprint of the truck, of you know, an extra truck hauling that stuff out of town to wherever the landfill might be.
Yeah, no, and that's ideal. Like, at least getting things more condensed, so you're not making the big loops and the big workarounds where it just doesn't make sense to do that kind of stuff. Right.
So the scale isn't there where it makes it a reasonable investment as far as money goes.
Yeah, precisely. Well, with that being the case, what is the risk of being a landfill worker? Were you ever nervous working around the array of machinery?
No, not the machinery. I had been working around big machines since I was, you know, basically 20. I went in the Air Force and started running big machines. But so being around them didn't bother me because I was always aware of the machines and what they were doing. You don't stand behind a machine. You unless you can see the operator and look him in the eyes, he can't see you. That's just a given. He might see you. He might not. I just take it for granted that he doesn't. So I just, you know, until you can make eye contact with the operator, don't even get near the machine.
Yeah.
So the things that made me nervous was policy that changed while I was working at the landfill. There was a new supervisor came in, and he was trying to make himself look good by saving the county some money. So he took some shortcuts that most of the workers didn't like very much. He 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would dig what they called a pest hole, P-E-S-T, a pest hole. And you go into some old garbage and you take an excavator and you dig as deep a pit as you could that was about 10 feet across and as far down as they could. And then all the nastiest stuff they could bring in, the dead animals, the medical waste, which was supposed to be autoclaved. They were supposed to, you know, disinfect it with heat before it ever was hauled here, but you don't know. So this stuff would go into the pest hole, and then they would cover it up at the end of the day, and that was where all the nastiest stuff went. And this new guy, he wanted to save some money, so he didn't want the guy on the excavator digging the hole twice a week. He could use him somewhere else, so they just started putting the medical waste into the regular garbage, which included thousands of needles. You know, so
just absolute
that was one of the things that concerned me, was that now I'm walking around in the garbage, whether it's the guy that's helping spread the tarps at the end of the day or pick them up in the morning, or just going to and from a machine. Now the machines got needles in their tracks. There's needles scattered all over the place. You know, I mean, when the truck comes in and dumps, it dumps in a pile, and then the dozer just kind of scatters it everywhere so the compactor can run it over. Well, now you got all these needles everywhere, and that bothered me.
Yeah, no, that's a bizarre thing to budget cut for.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty nasty.
That scared me more than the machines did.
Yeah, no respect for the workers, is what that's on.
And they also, another thing he started at the bottom of a landfill. I remember I said that they start with a liner so that any liquids that come out of the garbage don't go into the soil, into the groundwater. And they call it leachate because it leaches out of the trash and accumulates at the bottom. Well, they would draw that out, and there was a waste hauler that would take it to a special facility where it would be treated. So it wasn't, you can imagine what people throw away and what leaks into the garbage, at the bottom. So they would treat this liquid. Well, he wanted to reduce the cost of sending that truckload of stuff out to be treated, which was probably thousands of dollars. So he just started, on the landfill, it's mostly dirt. So they had water trucks that would spray water on the roadways to keep the dust down. So he started having us spray this leachate all over the place.
Oh, geez.
So it was basically contaminated liquid that was used to control dust. So when it dried and a truck drove over it, the dust was contaminated with what was ever in the leachate, and that bothered me as well.
Yeah.
I got a mist on the side of my face because the wind, as the water truck went by once, and it turned red and started burning. There's acids in it. There's all kinds of stuff in there. So that bothered me a lot too.
Yeah, that's a very disgusting thing to go through.
Yeah, and it was to cut costs so that he could make himself look good.
Yeah, and that's
what I did. I cut thousands of dollars from our budget. And you put all your workers at risk. So
Yeah, exactly.
But that starts to get into politics at that point.
yeah, and that's a whole nother loop of discussion. But if you could have gone back and chosen a different career path during your time with the county waste management, would you have changed directions?
When I got the job with the county of Sacramento, I was just looking for an equipment operator position to do just about anything. I was trained on enough machines to be comfortable just about anywhere. Road construction. I used to do stuff around houses before they were built and after they were built, with the soil and stuff like that. So that's all I was really looking for, was a way to get out of the truck and into a machine where I didn't have to deal with traffic.
That's fair.
That was probably my biggest problem with trucking, was traffic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I came from the big city to a smaller city. Sacramento was a little cow town when I showed up. Compared to Chicago, Sacramento was nothing. So it was a little town for me. But as the years went by, the population increased and the traffic increased, and now it's just another big city.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. You saw the development of that place.
Yeah, I was part of it. I would haul equipment for contractors that built homes.
Wow.
So,
yeah,
I watched the area double in size from the time I moved in to the time I moved out, 25 years.
Yeah, it's crazy to me too, because even with 20 years of experience in California, California's been developed for quite a while now. It's at least in my time, there's always been a bunch of people.
Yeah, it's gone through boom and bust since the gold rush.
Yeah, no kidding.
You run out of gold and then the place becomes a ghost town like Bodie.
Yeah, there's a lot of old mines and stuff that just don't necessarily get recognition for how much history they hold with these communities that have came and gone.
Right, and now they're covered in trees. You can't even see them.
Yeah. It's I wish we could find more of the Chinese miner history locations and stuff. A lot of that was hidden.
That reminds me of a funny story. I was working in Folsom for a guy who does construction, and we would prepare a pad for them to build a house on, and then we do finished grading around it so that the water went away from the house in the right direction. And in the town of Folsom, they have half the town sits on the big cobbles, round river cobbles. And the Chinese would go through during the gold rush, and they would follow the gold vein. You know, they would follow where the gold was in those cobbles, but they wouldn't shore up the sides or anything. And every now and then there'd be the cobbles are like marbles. So, you know, have you ever tried to stack marbles? It doesn't stack very high. So what would happen is that these miners would get buried by all this rubble, and then they would just pick up where those guys were and keep going and leave the bodies in there.
Wow.
So when I was going through, part of our job was to cut an X on each pad a house would go on to see if there's cobbles on it. And so the joke at the end of the day, when you write down your time and on your timesheet, was that, you know, what job you were doing, you were digging for Chinamen. Because you're cutting an X in each property, and we found one cobble area that was just huge. Never found bones, but they ended up bringing in a huge crane and dropping a 50-ton block of steel from 150 feet up in 28 places on each pad to compact it instead of cutting the hole. After they uncovered one little cobble pocket that was 4 home sites in size.
Oh my goodness.
So I think that became a green space for the community.
Just massive. It's a lot of cobble.
There was a lot of cobble in one area, you know, it's just like a pocket.
Yeah.
And it's the old ancestral Yuba River that ran through there.
Oh, wow. There's so much history in California. It's great.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I love all the mining stuff. But on that note, do you have any projects you really hope to complete in the near future?
Well, I have a dump trailer that I'm making out of an old pickup bed from a Studebaker.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Putting a pretty hefty axle in it. My last trailer would not handle the loads that I would put on it, so I'm going to make it a little tougher. I'm hoping to get that done by midsummer. I'm in the middle of building the chassis and everything. I have the chassis built for the pickup bed itself with the hinges on it. I just have to build the chassis that has the wheels on it and then put on my hydraulics. And then pardon?
I'd slap it together, huh?
I want it to last forever, so I'm putting my welding skills to the task.
Oh, nice.
And then I have raised beds that I'm making. I have some materials that I want to repurpose. I have some roofing, sheet metal from roofing, and I have some old redwood 2x6s and some other scrap wood, and I'm going to make some raised beds out of them, about 8 feet long or 12 feet long and 4 feet wide and either 2 or 3 feet high.
Nice. That should be a fun project.
And since I have gophers, I'm going to put hardware cloth on the bottom of every one of them.
yeah, exactly. It's great to keep the pests out.
Mm-hmm. Just the worms. That's all I want.
Just the worms. Hey, but those are all great things. Are there any media sources you'd recommend to our viewers before we come to a close?
Yeah, there is a lot of homesteading type videos on YouTube. I have 180 subscribed YouTube channels that I look at every now and then, and about a dozen of them are about homesteading and gardening and that kind of thing. So I'll give you a couple, but it'd probably be best if you maybe listed them in your description. That way nobody spells them wrong. You know, they'll be spelled right.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be able to do that.
One of the sites, and these are on eBay. eBay. These are on YouTube. One is called Tiny House and Off-Grid. Tiny House and Off-Grid Resources. There's one, it's called Grow Veg, just VEG.
Okay.
There's one that's called Self-Sufficient Me. He's an Aussie, so he's got a little warmer climate down there, but he's got some great ideas on soils and raised beds. There's one called Naked Gardeners, NAKID, and no, they don't run around naked, but they're in, I believe, Texas. And there's a Rose Red Homestead, and she does canning.
Okay. That's great for the people who want to plan for hunting trips and stuff. Right.
Let's see. There's Health and Homestead. Homevert Homesteader. HOMEVERT. Homevert Homesteader. Homestead Heart. So there's a lot of good resources on YouTube alone. You can get into Rumble, other stuff. And then one that I listen to, he's a research scientist and lab scientist. His name is Mike Adams, and he puts out what he calls the Health Ranger Report on Brighteon.com.
Okay.
And he gets down, he sells prepping supplies, but he inspects everything he buys before he resells it to make sure it doesn't have any contaminants in it. He has a electron microscope and does electron spectroscopy to break down everything that's in all the products that he sells. And so he's done a couple other things. He made a video called Biosludged, and he investigated some of the garden's supplements, soil amendments that you can buy in bags. And so he did a great breakdown on where some of these supplements are coming from and what they have in them. I don't know, should I say something about a specific brand, or should I keep it vague?
Well, we'll probably let the viewers kind of check that out, and then
okay, fair enough.
Because
the movie is called Biosludged, like it's past tense. Biosludged, and it's by Mike Adams.
And there's just too many companies to name. That's
right.
That's really ultimately it.
There's one that he brings up that is sold in one of the garden centers in Reno.
Oh, really?
So that's why I bring that up.
Oh my God!
He mentions that brand specifically. So if you go watch the movie, you'll understand. But basically, it's sewage waste from Milwaukee.
Oh yeah.
Turned into a garden supplement.
Big problem with their waste.
And it's full of heavy metals. It's full of pharmaceuticals. Yeah. Of course, was it the FDA or the CDC or somebody? No, it was one of the government agencies said it's perfectly fine. It's reasonable levels.
Oh yeah.
But when it comes to heavy metals, there's no reasonable levels, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or pharmaceuticals, So unless you read the bag where it says, it's good for lawns, well, it must be good for vegetables. Well, I wouldn't want to put that on my vegetables because now you're introducing heavy metals and pharmaceuticals into your vegetable stream.
Yeah, nasty stuff. Nasty stuff.
Think about anybody in the town of Milwaukee, what they eat, ending up in your garden fertilizer.
Exactly. Ugh. nasty.
Yeah.
It's
Mike
a
does
rough
a great
thought.
job breaking that down, and there are other products that do the same thing, but he breaks it down really well. And you know, after they stream out the solids, the biodegradable solids, like you know, think about what you flush down the toilet after an evening with an acquaintance, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. There's some nasty stuff in the sewers and in pipelines that it builds up. It's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, kids throwing things in the toilet and flushing them. It all ends up at the waste treatment plant, and then they filter out the solids, and then they turn the rest into a fertilizer for your lawn.
Yep.
But I mean, even though you're not eating the lawn, it's still contaminating the soil under it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's a proxy effect.
And they're selling it to farmers to spread on crops. So
yeah, it doesn't just stay stationary.
No. The home consumer is not the biggest buyer of this stuff.
Well, that's definitely a problem we can discuss more about later in the future, because we need to get more into soil science. That's something I want to learn more about, and I think the average consumer needs to understand how important that health is to the local land and just the local community in general. I mean, we all should want strong soil, without a pesticide, without a chemical introduced.
Right. If we could educate the average person more on soil and soil building, I think that would go a long way. People would tend to keep their kitchen waste for their own soil as opposed to just throwing it in the garbage or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd have to agree with you there. It's an underestimated thing, to say the least. But on that note, Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I think this is something we're going to have to revisit in the near future. Talk over some different specifications in these industries, especially agriculture. There's a lot to touch there that we didn't really have the time for today, but I think we got through some good sections, and people have a general idea of your background with the machinery and the different hands-on experiences. And that's very inspiring stuff. I think you've done a lot in your time exploring what's out there, and you've really taken to the reins of controlling what you can do and how you learned, and that's great stuff, Jeff. Genuinely cool to see. And I really do value you taking the time to share that story with others.
Well, I appreciate you having me. You value my opinion. If I could leave with one last thought, is turn off the TV and go outside and play in the dirt.
This is true. This is true. Dirt works wonders. As you were saying with the energy, it's proven. It's proven, folks. Yep.
Just watch any kid after he's played out in the yard all day.
It's very true. It's healthy. We're connected for a reason, then.
Yep.
Well,
so, yeah, look up the Schumann resonance, and you'll like that too.
Well, we'll definitely write these down for folks in the description. Just look below, and we'll have that all there for you. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. We both had a lot of fun recording together, and I enjoyed the time debating and listening and reasoning with people, because it produces good moments like this. So I'm excited for the next one. We're going to have a streamer on next, so look forward to that, and I hope you enjoyed this one. I really do enjoy doing this content for you guys, so we really do appreciate you coming around.